Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is a Zurich-trained Jungian analyst and alchemical psychotherapist. He has led groups and explored dreaming with individuals in both analytical and didactic contexts, developing a method called Embodied Imagination. Embodied imagination in the work is dreams, waking memories, is practiced individually and in groups, and in psychotherapy medicine, theater, art, and creative research. It has been used as a rehearsal technique of the Royal Shakespeare Company in England, applied in medical research and psychotherapy in Japan. He has also authored several books and is the co-founder of the International Society for Embodied Imagination, the National Nightmare Hotline, and since 1997, cyberdreamwork.com. He is past president of the International Association for the Study of Dreams and was visiting professor of clinical psychology at Kyoto University in Japan. His interest in alchemy has been channeled into the first in a series of novels entitled Red Sulphur, The Great Mystery in Alchemy, books 1 and 2 in 2015. Welcome to the show, Robert Bosnak.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to be here. I had a little bit of technical difficulties in the morning, so apologies for people who are waiting for this. I know that you have people that really want to hear what you have to say, so I had to shorten the bio a little bit, and it seems I shortened it at an odd spot because I read it funny. Do you want to give people a little bit about your background? Because you've been doing some really exciting research for a long time.
Yeah. The way it started for me is that in my late teens and early 20s, I was quite ill and ended up in the hospital for about 11 months. And then Western medicine couldn't quite fix it. They fixed some of it, but not all. And so then I got married, and my wife had been in analysis at that time, and she said, you should go into analysis. And then I went to Zurich and started working in analysis. And then the first 2 years, all my symptoms cleared up. So I became really interested in the relationship between imagination, especially dreaming, and the body. That became my central interest. So I was not so much interested in what dreams mean, but how they affect us and how we can let them affect us deeper. And so from there, slowly I developed over the last 45, 47 years, this technique of embodied imagination. And with that, what we're doing is we're helping artists to get deeper into their characters, actors. I didn't do this, but another dream worker did. The movie A Star Is Born is the first movie that is entirely dream worked, where the two main actors worked with their dreams in order to get deeper into character. And that's what we're doing. And there are different methods. My method is particular, and what they use is a little bit different, but it's the same kind of material. And then we work in healing with, we have healing sanctuaries where we work particularly with dreams and art and all these kind of things, and it affects the body deeply. We do studies about placebo, because I think that what I'm doing is very much the way imagination influences the body, which is studied in the placebo studies. So yeah, I'm totally fascinated by this stuff. I think that dreams, I said it in my first book, I said dreams are an act of genius. It is the greatest act of genius that we can make.
Wow. Well, you shortened that a lot more than I thought, because I've looked at your course and I read some of your bio, and it's an immense amount of work. I'm not even sure the most productive way to go. I'm curious about dreams. The only thing that I can say is I taught myself how to lucid dream, and I thought that was interesting. And I've been studying with a Native American elder, and he was actually expressing that in his culture and from his teachings that dreams are very, very special. Because imagination's one thing, it's kind of derived a little bit from consciousness, a little bit more, but dreams are coming from a totally different space. So maybe you can touch a little bit on
Yes.
just what you found about dreams and how we can start to use them.
Yes. That's what I'm going to be teaching in this course, right? This course is going to be going out of your mind with Robert Bosnak, and I try to help people go out of their mindset into a new mindset. And for that, it is really, and the first of the course has already happened, so you can get that, download that from the Jung platform, jungplatform.com. But anyway, in the next sessions, what I'll be doing is to go into dreaming, because I think, and I agree with your Native American person that you talk to, um, that dreams are a form of reality. And so I think that this form of reality of dreaming is not just happening in dreaming. I think it happens all the time, but it happens particularly in dreaming, because in dreaming, there's a whole world that is being created. You're suddenly in that world. The act of creativity of it is astounding. I mean, you could never, ever do this in Hollywood with $200 million and a year worth of work. Any dream is more real than Avatar, which I think is one of the most real movies that has been made, in the sense of getting you into that reality. But dreams are much more real. And so in a dream, you know that you're awake. And while you're awake, you have these adventures, and then you wake up. When you talk about lucid dreaming, it's a very small percentage of dreaming. The vast, vast majority of dreaming, you don't know that you're dreaming. Lucid dream is that you know that you're dreaming. But the ordinary dream, you are convinced that you're awake. You're convinced that you're in an environment where something is happening, and you're convinced that everything around you is embodied and physical. So you're completely convinced of that, and then you wake up into your culture. So if you wake up into Western culture, then you would say, either in the scientific tradition, you would say this is all hogwash of the brain washing itself, or the brain integrating things, or that's what science would say. And then you can, what psychology frequently says is that these things are part of me, which I think means that psychology is a product of Western individualism. If you ask neuroscience, which is into materialism, they say that it's happening in the brain. But it doesn't mean anything, because while dreaming, that is not the question. So I am trying to go into imagination, this real form of imagination, the creative imagination, with dreaming as my paradigm, because that is the most clear form of imagination that we have. So that's why I start there, and then see what we can learn from dreaming to go out of our minds, to go out of our habitual minds, and to go into a place of going into deeper space, because that's what I'm interested in. It's kind of a space travel.
Right. Interesting. Well, it's funny because I was talking to my friend the other day about lucid dreaming. I teach people a little bit how to lucid dream, and I've studied that for a while. And what the easiest technique for me was that actually worked is, throughout the day, I plug my nose like this, and I breathe in, and I say to myself, if I'm breathing, I'm dreaming. And it's the one that will click. And so sometimes I'll be doing something and then I'll be breathing and I go, holy crap, I'm dreaming. And my initial reaction for a while was frustration, because it's so real. Right. There's no way that you can tell the difference. It's absolutely happening in that space. You can't tell. So, the practical questions for me would, and feel free to steer this however you wish, because I know that you have a lot of knowledge, but it would be, how does a beginner start to remember their dreams? A lot of people say, I don't remember my dreams. And then how do we start to use our dreams, and what can we use them for?
Okay, very good. So, I think that what I used to do to get lucid is every half hour, I would jump up. And as I jumped, I could feel the amount of gravity that there was. And if the gravity was unusual, then I would think, oh, maybe I'm dreaming. And I would start checking it. The easiest way to check it, by the way, is to look at, if you become lucid, and you want to do something that's dangerous, like jumping off a building or something, then you look at something that's written, and then you look away, and then you try to change it, and you look back, and if it's still the same, then you're probably awake. So there are such things because the brain works a little bit differently while dreaming. And yes, but it is entirely real. The great researcher in the 19th century of lucid dreaming, he had hundreds of lucid dreams, and his main interest is that he couldn't tell them apart. You couldn't tell them apart. And so you may have heard about the foundation of Western science. The man is called Descartes. We've got this notion of the Cartesian world, right? The world that is split in body and in mind. He set up that whole system because he said, I don't know whether what I'm writing down right now, I'm writing down in a dream or while waking. So therefore, I cannot trust my senses at all because my senses could betray me because I could be dreaming. So he was after certainty. What I'm after is experience. So I'm really interested how people experience things, because what I've done is I've traveled all over the world and asked people, how do you dream and what do you dream? And tell me about your dreaming. And so I could not go with any metaphysical system like, for instance, dreams are about us, or dreams are about the ancestors, or dreams are hogwash. Or I couldn't go with any of those systems because it wouldn't work in China, where dreams are about the future, or it wouldn't work in Aboriginal Australia, where where dreams are about the ancestors or about rituals that need to be performed, and it would only be true for people who are in this psychology tradition of the 19th, 20th century, where it's all about us. That has always been very strange, because when you're dreaming, the world is entirely real around you. We just established that, right? The world is entirely real around you. Now, so imagine for a moment that we're now dreaming. Everybody who's listening to this, just imagine that you're dreaming right now. Then everything around you is real. And then the moment you say, this is about me, that's the moment that you have a delusion of reference. Because no, this world that you're sitting in, this screen behind me, this world that I'm sitting in, is not about me. And so why do we say the dreams are about us? We just know that they are encounters. So I help people to get back into those encounters and not just experience it from the perspective of yourself, the narrator of the dream. I was walking down the street. I was walking down the street. Not just from the perspective of I walking down the street, but also from the perspective of a bicyclist that comes by, or a tree that is over there, and move into different perspectives by way of techniques that we've developed from acting.
That sounds awesome, man. So do we go a little bit deeper in that way? Because I've heard of a few techniques like that. So one of the things that I would use was just a dream journal. And when I'd wake up, I would start to write. And the biggest thing, I think, for me, and probably a lot of the listeners, and maybe you can speak on this, is how do we just start remembering our dreams so we can start to work with them? And then once we have that remembrance of what we're dreaming, in what ways can we work with them? In what ways can we explore just improving our lives, or what kind of impact it can have?
Yes. The way to begin is to not assume that you know what a dream is. Lots of people think that dreams are stories, that they have a plot, they have a beginning and an end. Not necessarily. So that you decide for yourself that you're going to remember anything that you can. Anything that you can, even if it's just one little image. And because these little images are usually very interesting. And then in my course, I show how you then can get back into those images. I can tell you a little bit about it, but it's a longer process that I couldn't quite explain here. That's why I'm doing a 10-week course about it. But the way that I help you is by getting into a flashback. Now, the technique of getting into a flashback is a very important one. We know that flashbacks exist, right? Flashbacks come up very often with people. I've had many of them in my psychotherapeutic practice. People who've been traumatized. When you're traumatized, suddenly you can feel yourself back in a situation. Like if you were traumatized in on the battlefield and there's something very loud going off, then suddenly you're back in the battlefield. You can smell it, you can hear it, you can feel it. Your whole body goes into a battlefield state. We call that PTSD, but one of the main things about it is flashbacks. So the way that you can flashback into a dream, and that's what I would suggest for people to do first, flashback, is to take a place in the dream that you still remember as an event. So you go back to that event. So let's say I'm walking down the street, because dreams are usually humdrum. I love humdrum dreams. Dreams that are great battles and all these epic things, they're very rare and they're a nuisance, because you first have to get out of that narrative and you have to get back to the images, and people are very invested in the narrative. It takes forever. So I love humdrum dreams. I love the ordinary dreams that are like 80% of our dreaming. What you do is you first have to slow things down. This whole technique of going into the embodied imagination, to go into the world of imagination as a form of reality, because that's what we're after, right? We're after establishing that the imagination is a form of reality. We knew that up until about 800 years ago, then we lost it out of our culture. But before 800 years, like in the 12th, 13th century, we still knew that imagination was a form of reality. And then slowly it developed as the opposite of reality, right? Disney World. And what you do if you want to get back to the dream is you have to slow things down. Now, for those of you who've done meditation, you know that that's the way it goes. That you can only get into this world by slowing down. So it's a process of slowing down while you're in that image that you still remember. So say that you remember that I was walking and there was a car to my left and a bicycle over there. So first you get a sense of the way that the street is around you. So you have to get back, right? You have to first, there are some things that you've realized before. You have no idea what the dream is about. You have no idea what the dream means, because that is all your things outside of the dream that have nothing to do with the dreaming itself. You have no idea what it means. You just want to get back to it, because you know that while you were dreaming, it was entirely real. So I want you to go back to that, which is usually a moment in the dream. Like, for instance, I'm walking by a car and there is a bicycle coming towards me. So then I will ask, how do you walk? What is the light like? Is it very bright? Is it dark? People begin to get amazing precision in their perceptions once you start. And then as you do that, you will slowly get drawn into the dream. You get absorbed by the dream, and suddenly you're walking there again, at least almost. And you have a sense that you're present. You feel the car on your left. You feel that it's a blue car, and you begin to smell the events around you, and you begin to hear things. And so all your senses are getting involved. So that is the first thing that I would do with a dream. And then there are more steps that you can do afterwards to get deeper and deeper in, but that's a more complex problem that I'm, of course, going to address in the course.
Right. And just for clarity, can you, what do you mean by a humdrum dream exactly?
A humdrum dream is I went to the store and bought a loaf of bread.
Right. Got it.
That's a humdrum dream, and I love them. Because you cannot only work it from the perspective of the one buying the bread, but you can work it from the perspective of the bread. You can work it from the perspective of the lady who stands by the checkout. You can work it from the perspective of the store itself, because everything is animation, right? In a dream, everything's animated. So you can just go to that particular animation, like as if you're in an animation studio and there is somebody working on that particular aspect. So then you get to that particular aspect and you become identified with it through techniques that are more or less acting techniques. They're called miming techniques. And then suddenly you can see it from the perspective of the woman at the checkout. She has a completely different view than you buying a loaf of bread. And the bread is a very different entity than you getting the bread. So there are all these potential perspectives that I help people get into. But that's a step further. That I usually say, if you want to do that, do it with a friend, because somebody has to ask the questions. Dreams are about what we call intersubjective fields. They happen between us. You tell me your dream, I tell you my dream. A field is created between us. And in that field, the dream begins to play. So it's much easier to work on a dream with someone else. As long as the other person is not going to interpret your dream for you. That's the one thing I don't want.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then I know people who are new to dreaming or are curious about dreaming. They're going to ask this question, and I get it.
Oh,
quite
good.
frequently.
Yes. Yeah.
Just, are nightmares bad? And I presume not.
It depends.
Oh.
There are nightmares that I would hope would end. Imagine a person, again, a traumatized person, who is in what the first psychoanalyst, Sigmund Freud, what Freud called a repetition compulsion. That means that he goes through the trauma again and again and again. Now, that is a nightmare that I would want to do something about, if I could. Not necessarily with medication, but there are techniques in which you can help shift the nightmare. Usually, the ordinary nightmares now, so not the traumatic nightmares, I'm not talking about ordinary nightmares, are not good or bad. There's no, they just are. It's the question, is a storm a bad thing? No, storms are. We get affected by them, but they just are. And so what I do with nightmares very much is I see if I can get to a place in the nightmare where there's a sense of safety, or I'm trying to get into a position of something in the nightmare that has safety. Like, for instance, if you have a murderer chasing you, then your body is not a safe place, because that is in the sense running away and running from the murderer. The murderer is not a safe place, because so that doesn't work either. But if, for instance, you have over there a table, and you can help the person put their attention on the table and see that the table is very strong and that they have strong legs. And as you begin to identify with the table, then what happens around you becomes less scary, because the table is very well situated, very well grounded. And so you get a grounded position in a situation that, from the ego's perspective, is intensely scary. I do that also with people who've been traumatized. That, like, if a person was in a rape, then you don't go at it from the perspective of the person who's being raped, because then you re-traumatize a person. But if you do it from the perspective of the table, looking over there and staying in the perspective of something else, an other animation, then what's happening over here becomes seen in peripheral vision. And you keep looking there, and you are beginning to focus on here, but you keep looking there. And that's one of the ways that I would work with trauma and with nightmares. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. I appreciate that. Cause there's definitely a difference between a nightmare that is repetitive and it's, traumatizing, and then just an experience that, like, we perceive as bad, like the storm. So what would be your number one advice if somebody's going through that, like a traumatic nightmare?
Talk to someone. If you feel that you can't talk about it to a therapist, talk about it with someone maybe who has gone through a similar experience, that you can share the experience. It is this is a process that in psychology we call dissociation. So that means that in order to survive the trauma, you had to shrink and push everything that was dangerous and frightening away. So now you're here and you're disconnected from all these satellites around. And so what the work would be is to reconnect to those satellites. But as you reconnect with the satellites, then all the pain that's in the satellite will infuse the system. So it's very painful. So you don't want to do it too directly because you re-traumatize the system and then it starts to shoot off more satellites. So is that clear? Does that make sense? And interrupt me if I don't make sense, because I've been talking about this stuff for close to 50 years. So the thing that makes sense to me don't make sense to anybody else. So what you try to do is to make that connection with the satellite indirectly, as I said, through peripheral vision, and then slowly let the pain of it fuse back into the system. And as it fuses back into the system gets bigger again, and you get out of that claustrophobia of being in a tiny little soul that is packed so small and compact so you don't have to feel all these other things.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. Yeah. There's similar techniques in NLP where you'll use like the third party because you're not experiencing it directly. If you had a traumatic, say, get hit by a car, and you put yourself in that moment before you're about to get hit and feel all that pain, or something worse, like an attacker or something, you're going to feel all those. But from the car's perspective or the tree at the side of the road, you can observe it with a little bit of less of that energy, so you can bring more awareness into the situation about other things that were going on.
Yeah, no, that's a technique that we developed like 40 years ago, about getting into other perspectives, getting into non-self perspectives. And this is not making things up. You're not making things up. What you're doing is, through a process of miming, like for instance the tree, that you there was a person, this is a case, a woman who gets, and this is in Minnesota, she gets on black ice and she spins out and she ends up against a tree. And thank God she's not terribly wounded, and we don't even know if she has a concussion. But it was a terrible thing. It was very frightening. And so we worked that from the perspective of the tree that she runs into. And because she was telling me that the tree had a certain amount of bend to it. So we focused on the tree, and as the tree felt the impact, it started bending back. And as it starts bending back, I help her to feel that ability to bend back and come back up. And that then, as she begins to feel that, comes into her body as a sense of resilience. She now has resilience, and she can bend with it. She can roll with the punches in this particular case. And so I think it's really important to get into non-self perspectives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And I think there's a lot of value just seeing things. I think it just increases the amount of awareness.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of ways that I want to go with this. My bigger question is, if we're dreaming, how does that impact daily life consciousness? Because then we're looking at what is consciousness. So I don't know if all animals dream. I know some animals dream, but like, what is the function and origin and meaning of dreaming, and how does that affect our understanding of waking consciousness? And to give a little bit of clarity from where I'm coming from is, some people will wake up, their alarm will go off, they'll be stressed all day, going about their work, running a pattern. That's a level of consciousness. Through meditation, you can experience something else, through joy, through a traumatic experience, but it's real. And in dreaming, it's also real. But what does that mean, that you're able to experience something just as real as this scenario that you have in your daily quote unquote waking life, and the implications on consciousness and just existing?
Well, I think that first we would have to define consciousness. I can only define it from its etymology, where the word comes from. And the word means knowing with. So consciencia, knowing with. So then it needs to have something else. You cannot just go through a program. The person that you said is getting up and going through a particular program is not conscious, because there is no knowing with. There's only knowing. Knowing this has to be done, this has to be done. Blah, 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 blah. That's a kind of a program that goes off that has zero consciousness in it. So consciousness is the ability to, at the same time, experience something as being aware of that you're experiencing it. That is a definition of consciousness. Anything that you just know, but you don't know that you know, or that you're not aware of how you know, or there is no other knowledge than going through a program like a computer. That's why a computer doesn't have consciousness, because a computer only has the data, the knowing, but it doesn't know about its knowing. And so as long as it doesn't know about its knowing, it has no consciousness. So the person who goes through this is also going through an absence of consciousness. So how to create consciousness through dreaming, I think, is one of the questions that we have to come from. Let me tell you the parts of your question that I cannot answer or that I do not answer. I do not know what dreams are for. I have fantasies about it. My fantasy is, and that will take many, many years to see if somebody is going to go into proving that. I think that dreams are part of the immune system, and that it is the way that that the imagination deals with the world. But I don't know. That could be. But I'm not using that. What I'm using is that I don't know what dreams mean, but I do know that when you get into a state of interaction with them, you go into the dreams and you are aware that you're in a dream. So you have consciousness while you're in a dream because you're aware that you're in a dream. You're aware that you're working on a dream. If you do that, then something changes in your day-to-day life. So I don't know if dreams themselves change anything, although there's research about that. But I'm talking about the working with the dreams. There's research that shows that that as a person moves further away from a trauma, that the dreams begin to change, and so that dreams seem to have something to do with an integration process, something to do with that trauma gets transformed into something that is digestible. So that would be a possibility, that dreams are like what my friend Ernest Hartman used to say, that dreams are part of an innate psychotherapy system. So that is possible, but it's not something that I'm working with. I only know that if I help you to get into your dreaming and begin to experience it from the perspective of your dreaming self and from the perspective of others, profound things begin to happen to your day life. Things begin to happen to your health, things begin to happen to your creativity. If you're working, I've worked with people on projects of making apps, and people working on physics and microbiology. You can work on many different things through this imagination with dreaming and other forms of deep imagination. So I do not know what dreams mean.
Interesting. Well, what that makes me think about is just like, in what ways, like if I want to, do we need somebody outside of ourselves all the time, or in what ways can we use dreams? Like if somebody's like in what different way can they use that to improve their life? Or is it just the process of beginning to relate to your dreams in certain ways, things will naturally unfold? Like, do you go in with a purpose and intention, or do you just go in with to uncover information?
I think that you should. I think it's helpful to go from a perspective that goes right against all the things that people tell you about dreams. I think you should go towards dreams without expecting messages. A dream is not a message. A dream is a world that you are in. It's a real world. It's like traveling to a country that you don't know. And so that realizing that you're traveling through all these worlds all the time, and that you spend 8-10 years of your life traveling through these worlds, these dream worlds, where you're entirely convinced that you're in a real world. And if you get back to that, then in the first place you realize that you're participating in a great mystery. I think that that's the first step. If you cannot see your dreams as a great mystery, you're missing something. Dreams are a creation of a world that we call them cosmogonic. They create a whole world in a fraction of a second. Now, that is a mystery. How that works, nobody knows. And nobody will know for a long time, if ever. So if the person is then able to not try to find the message in a dream, what does this mean for me? But I was somewhere and I would like to get back there. I would like to know what was happening there. So if you then, by slowing it down, get back into that world of the dream and first experience it in the body and feel what is going on with your body, you will already get a lot of new information. If you, for instance, are working on an app and you have a dream of a ship that is tacking. I mean, this is from an actual work on an app. You have a ship that is tacking. You can begin to feel the tacking of the ship. And as you feel the tacking of the ship and the movement of the ship, and you become identified with the ship and you can feel it, then you can notice that that is a way to deal with the app. Because you have to move here and then you don't know it anymore, and then you have to move there, and you have to constantly move. And if your body, like that ship, is able to tack against the wind, then your embodiment in making the app is much more appropriate to the app. So I would do that by helping the person first get into the boat and into the sensing the wind and feeling all that. But then I would get into the boat on the water and the sails, and then I would, through feeling that animation, what it is like to tack. And then you learn great things. So that's a way that I would go about it.
Okay, interesting. So I'm kind of, my mind is going in two directions. The first is thinking about senses and this reality, you know, so we see, we touch, we hear, we taste, we have these senses.
Yeah.
We also experience that directly in the dream. So what the heck is going on? And then, you know, I've got Tom Campbell coming on simulation theory, and a few people are saying there's strong evidence towards being in a simulation. I'm just curious, the standpoint you come from and just experiencing this reality, if it's sensory, and then we're going into another sense experience, if there's an understanding that comes with that, and like how we can navigate our lives. Like one of them for me is, you know, some religious people were upset on the podcast about simulation because they said there was no God, but Tom Campbell wasn't suggesting that. He was saying that he's like, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that this is a ground to learn and experience and to grow. And there is something. It's just what's actually physically happening here is more simulation based, as that's where the science is going. So it's a bit of a roundabout kind of thing. I'm just curious your perspective on just the senses experiencing reality. As you mentioned earlier, we don't know if it's actually happening, because I could be in a dream right now. You know, I was just in one an hour ago.
Right. So the question, is this really happening, is a moot question, because at the moment that you're dreaming, you believe this. You are completely convinced that this is actually happening. So if you go from the perspective of experience, what you have is your embodied intelligence to feel what's going on. And a major part of this course is about embodied intelligence. How can the intelligence of your body feel where you are in a dream and what you can do with a dream? So I go from the perspective that we are experiencing particular things. That's why I'm not interested whether it's a simulation or a dream or physical reality. Doesn't matter, because these are all experiences of reality, because we are experiencing it as reality. If you say that it's a simulation, you're actually doing metaphysics, because you're saying that you're looking at it from outside of it. I'm not looking at it from outside of it. I'm looking at it from within the dreaming. So within the dreaming, all your senses are activated. So that's why I call it embodied imagination. You're fully embodied and your intelligence is fully embodied. So you hear things, you smell things, you touch things. All your senses are in this world, in this embodied world of dreaming, fully activated. And then when you wake up, you call it, oh, it was just a dream. But that is not why while you're dreaming. So my perspective is always from while I am dreaming, because that to me is the most different perspective from my waking perspective. And so therefore I want to move as far from my waking perspective as I can. And when I move as far from it as I can, I end up in dreaming. And then I want to explore dreaming to learn from dreaming also about my waking perspective and to develop my embodied intelligence, the way my body understands dreams. That's what I'm interested in.
Right. Awesome. I got it. Okay. So let's go a little bit deeper with that, because it makes me think about just the Zen concept of, surrendering. We're more observing as we go through, and the conscious mind only holds a small bit of information. I read a long time ago, I don't know if it's still true, but it's 5 to 7 bits of information. So I'm constantly analyzing threats through the reticular activating system. So that way I don't get hit by a car. I don't get, trampled by a moose.
Yeah, it's called your working memory. It's holds about seven bits of information.
Right. And so when we go into the body, I've heard before, and I like the idea that the body is actually the super intelligent thing. It's just like if something happens, the body will just all of a sudden do parkour. And
way before you know anything. Right.
Yeah. And then that unconscious mind or whatever the body is connected to, that intelligence is going to sense whatever that danger is before. And all of this other magic is happening, and kind of, sometimes I call it like the dum-dum brain. So like Matt or whoever I think I am, you're not going to be able to think through everything. It's just going to be like, put a stupid look on my face as I scream and run.
Well, that's exactly what I mean with going out of your mind, because then you go out of your mindset and then you let that enormous intelligence of the body do its things and you begin to sense it. This is something that actually came into psychology already in 1880. Because the greatest of U.S. psychologists ever was William James. And he asked a question in 1880, when you're in the woods and you see a bear, do you run because you're afraid, or are you afraid because you run? Right? To which, of course, most people say, well, I run because I'm afraid, but that's not the case. And then William James could start lecturing you at Harvard and say, no, that is not the case, because you're already running long before you know that you're afraid. Because your system, by way of the amygdala, the information comes into the amygdala way before it goes into your visual center. Your visual center is actually to correct things that are happening in your amygdala already. So if you see something, you go, ah! That's an amygdala experience, and you think you see a snake, and then your visual cortex says, no, it's not a snake, it's a stick. So your visual cortex is correcting something that's already happening in the body. So therefore, he says, you find yourself running, and then you realize you're afraid. And so the body is the first to know, and that's what I'm interested in. And that's why I'm interested in this notion of MQ, embodied intelligence, which is different from IQ, which is different from EQ, emotional intelligence. It's a different kind of intelligence. It's distributed. I mean, it's all over your body. There can be something happening in your shoulder that is not happening in your leg. And it's a different kind of intelligence in your shoulder than you have in your leg. That's a different kind of intelligence that you have in your belly than you have in your head. So there are all these intelligences going on simultaneously, and you can feel them with your body. And as you feel them with your body, you get a much larger spectrum of information. So I'm interested in to get to the highest amount of information that I can get to. And because we are dealing with something so complex that we can only deal with it if we have a great deal of information. So the body has many of these different kinds of information going on. And if you're able, and that's what I call embodied intelligence, if you're able to feel all those different intelligent streams, like I'm afraid here, I'm defending myself there, I am attracted here, and all these kind of things. If I can feel that and hold that together, then out of that something new begins to emerge. And that is how the embodied intelligence then brings a new state of mind. And so that's what I'm trying to teach.
That's awesome. Well, I'm interested. I want to know. You know,
Good.
I see it from an athletic perspective of just peak performance. You know, when you say get the most information, that I hear as a consciousness
Yeah.
performance. Like, what is,
Yeah.
you know, I've been curious, how do I maximize my consciousness? How do I maximize my body? How do I do these things? And information is one of those things. So,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you can go deeper onto the embodied intelligence, because I think that that's brilliant. From what I've looked at and kind of where my research has gone, it really is more getting into the body, into the senses, and out of the mind. When I'm going to do something really challenging on my snowboard or something else, I don't think about it. I have a preset, and then
Yeah.
it's like the body. Like, if I had to think about what has to happen when I do a backflip
You're
over a
dead.
big
Oh
jump, it's
God,
not
you're
going to
dead.
work.
Not
You know
going to
what I mean?
work.
So
No.
I trust this.
That's why I always explain that to people. I say, if you are riding your bicycle and you have to think about how you ride your bicycle, you're on your face.
Yeah.
Your body knows how to ride a bicycle. That's embodied intelligence. And so your body it's usually your embodied intelligence that is driving a car, because you know when you're in a car that you know the body of the car. Otherwise, you couldn't go through very tight places. If you didn't exactly feel with your system, with your body, embodied intelligence, the size of the car. You're identified now with the car. You know exactly how long the car is, but you know it in a visceral way. So that's an embodied intelligence. And then the notion of embodied, I think it is more than just somatic intelligence. Somatic intelligence would be the way that you can feel things happening in your body. But when you are making a flip, how do you call them in with snowboarding?
Backflip, front flip, all
Yeah,
kinds.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so you're in a flip. Then you have in mind the image of the flip. You somehow, your whole system knows the image of the flip, and your body adjusts to the image of the flip. So therefore, the embodiment is a relationship between image and body. So that's why, for instance, there was research about all this. Stephen Koslin is one of the first big researchers about sports and image at Harvard, and he tells there was the gymnastic team. I think the U.S. gymnastic team, and they checked with people who had come on the team and people who didn't make the team, and how they would do their visualizations, because everybody does visualizations in top sport, because otherwise you, like if you go through the track already, you visualize the track before you go through it, and when you ski. So the people who did not make it on the team were people who were visualizing by looking at themselves as they were going through their routine. The people who made it on the team, without exception, from what I remember, without exception, were feeling it in their bodies as they were moving through their routines. It was not something that they were seeing happening. It was not a visualization. It was an embodiment. And that's what I'm interested in, that you need your whole body to go into it. And then as you do that, you will find that your body learns. Because as you do these embodied intelligent exercises, you're on the slope in a completely different way than you are if you just think about it. Thinking doesn't do anything. It has to go entirely through your embodied intelligence. And I think that a baseball pitcher, as he imagines going through a windup, feels all of this in there. It doesn't just look at himself doing it, but feels it all going through the arm and going through the ball, and all that energy going into the ball and out. and feeling it coming from the gut and just pushing it out and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I've never been a pitcher, but that's how they get these balls to fly 100 miles an hour. By being fully in their body, by letting the embodied intelligence doing it. And that's why I say, get out of your mind, get out of that mind that is trying to rule your embodied intelligence. Your embodied intelligence is much smarter than you. If you can just stay out of the bloody way and feel how your embodied intelligence already knows things, and just follow your embodied intelligence. It's a different way of being in the world.
Yeah. Yep, I 100% agree. And, I had an athlete, fall in a front flip, and I just taught him one thing. I went through and listened to, what he was saying, and I kind of helped a couple of things. And I said, all you need to do is visualize yourself doing that trick. And I tell athletes in two ways. One, do it from third person so you see what it looks like, but you have to do it in first person to feel what it's like. That's the ultimate one. You want to know what it's going to look like perfect, because sometimes they don't know what it looks like. Mm-hmm. So he did that, and 3 weeks later lands a front flip. 3 weeks after that, world's first front flip heel clicker on a motorcycle. 3 weeks after that, world's first front flip Superman on a motorcycle with that one technique. That's it.
Yeah.
No complication, no books, no like.
It's absolutely, that is basic embodied intelligence. You're teaching basic embodied intelligence. And that's what I want to get into the world, that this is a very important way of doing it, because it's the same thing that you can teach a person how to be behind the microscope and feeling the whole body while being behind the microscope. And then you will see things through the microscope differently. And that's actually what's happened when I work with biochemists, that as you feel that body and the intelligence of the body, you look differently, you see things differently. Painters paint differently because the canvas tells them different things, and their whole body gets into it, and getting into it. And the wonderful side effect that I find is that suddenly the world comes to life, because it is not something you're trying to control. You're realizing that you can't control this. You have to practice this. And then as you practice this, it will start taking control of you. And then the whole control comes through the intelligence of the body, and you go much further than you went before, but that's practicing, that is not control. And thereby a person feels that the world around them is alive, because one of the great horrors of Western consciousness is that where we spend the most money is on science. And according to the main science that we have is physics. And everybody wants to look like physics, like psychology wants to look like physics. Everybody wants to look like physics. But in physics, we are living on a tiny little speck that floats around an insignificant star that is on an arm of a galaxy that doesn't really matter, because there are millions of galaxies. There is some hum in the background from a big bang that has happened at one point. Zero meaning, meaningless. We are meaningless. The interesting thing is when you start to get into your embodied intelligence, the question of meaning starts disappearing, because you feel the intelligence going through you. And you move into the world that is fully animated. And that's what I'm after. Helping people to get into an animated world, a world that's alive and vibrant. Because what I see very frequently in the different, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in my course as well, in the different generations, I see different ways of not being in a vibrant world. Like in my generation, the baby boom, I'm one of the oldest baby boomers, I'm 70. So as I look at it, I have to stay alive in a particular way and feel the world as vibrant, that is different from maybe you're a millennial or something, where you are in a state of 25 and now what? Where you're in the state of the world is not the way I thought it was, but what is it like? And so you need all ways to get the information so that world comes to life. And from what I understand is that that generation, which could be the generation of my grandchildren, um, is very interested in experience. And that's very similar to the way that we were in the 60s. We're also very interested in experience. So I will help people to experience more fully. That's one of my tasks, I think.
That sounds amazing to me. So how do we begin to do this? Because I kind of see it as in, when I was first researching Zen, it's more of getting out of my mind and just observing the body do it. It seems like there's some similarities there.
Yes, very much.
And how do we, how does one go about maybe you can share some techniques or whatever way you think we should go. But I want to know always how to do it. And I know it's a 10-week course and you can't share everything, but I see it kind of like, cause you have this balance, right? Like I make choices through the day. I can choose to go skateboarding. I can choose to go to the gym. I can choose to write something down. So when I'm accessing that choice consciousness, I'm using just kind of that limited thing. I'm not into that embodied intelligence. I don't know. Maybe I am.
No.
Right. So then it's like kind of the yin yang push pull. Right. So when somebody is got all these tasks and they got a family and they got all that kind of stuff, that's one scenario. But then you get a little bit more freedom. You have a little bit of another scenario because you have more time and choice. So I don't know how does each person use it in the same way, and in what way do I go about the day and access this?
Yeah, good. As I say, embodied intelligence is distributed. So it is, your belly is feeling something different than your heart does. Or, for instance, for me, when I get defensive, my right shoulder moves forward. So, but my right shoulder is forward long before I know that I'm defensive. So by studying how my body is responding, I know that when this begins to happen, I'm getting defensive. So therefore, and when I breathe like, then I'm probably afraid, but I already have that breathing long before I know that I'm afraid. So I am beginning to learn how my body is in the world, and my body is in the world in my belly in a different way than it's in my legs and my knees. So the way that you can work with it, and I'll explain all this stuff much further, is, for instance, you have to make a move. You are living in a certain place and you have to go to another place, but you don't know if this is the right moment. Let's just give an example. And so the way that this works is, how does it make me feel to stay here? How does it make me feel to be here? I'm slowing it down and I'm feeling myself in this environment that I'm in now. How does that environment affect me? And then slowly I get into the body of this environment. And then I feel in the body which part of the body is most activated. Like, for instance, I feel most here in my belly. I feel most that I'm at home here. I don't want to leave here. It's all in my belly. Then I go to the other place where I could go. And I look at the other place and I feel there's excitement in it. And there's excitement in it. I want to go there. But at the same time, I can also feel danger in it, because in going there, something could happen and I could end up in the middle with nothing. So I begin to feel the place and I can begin to feel the fear. And then I end up with 3 different places in my body. So I feel the comfort of being at home and not moving at all in my belly. I can feel the fear of that I will end up with nothing in my heart. And I can feel that other place is brilliant in the mind, in the head. And then I trigger all these 3 states. I feel the shining excitement in the forehead. I feel the fear in my heart, and I feel the comfort in my belly. And then I hold these 3 states because it's distributed. So I hold these 3 states in my body. As you hold that for a minute or 2, something new will begin to happen. And a piece of information will come, we call that an emergent phenomenon. It comes from something called complexity theory. And there's an emergent phenomenon. Out of this emerges something that is new, that is an attitude that is new, that has not been there before. Because otherwise you will always try to solve things from what I call your habitual consciousness. And what this whole work is about is to get out of your habitual consciousness. MQ, Embodied Intelligence, helps you get out of your habitual consciousness, because that is where you are. If you are making this flip and you always do it wrong, then there's probably a way that habitual consciousness is in the way. And so it has to be out of the way so that your body can start making those flips. I was thinking about something about Zen. Shall I go into that for a moment? Yeah. And that is about Zen painting. The way that a Zen painter paints a bamboo, and this I've been told by several Zen painters, I work a lot in Japan, is you look at the bamboo and then you wait until you're identified with the bamboo. And once you're identified with the bamboo, then you paint the self-expression of the bamboo. So it's not that I paint the bamboo, but I become absorbed in the bamboo. I become part of the bamboo. And as I become part of the bamboo, then it can start to self-express. And so I get something that is much further away from habitual consciousness that is trying to paint the bamboo. And I think that that is central to Zen art. And it's also central to the work that I'm doing.
Got it. That was a really good explanation. The way that I kind of make sense of that is that it's almost that surrender to like a higher power, a bigger intelligence, because really even just the processing that it goes to grab a spoon and put it into your mouth, if you had to think about everything that actually was happening, it is so far beyond. And if the conscious mind thinks...
You put it in your ear. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's the wrong spot. And so, there's so much happening, like the consciousness of what it can focus on is so minimal to do a task that's so grand and an experience that is a mystery beyond what we can possibly fathom.
Right. And that's why we can use our dreaming, because our dreaming can help us with that. Our dreaming can help us go with tasks that rational awareness, where habitual awareness can't go. That's why in the healing sanctuaries of old, where dreaming so I'm talking about Greece and Turkey and in Rome and the Roman Empire, dreaming was central to all healing processes. And the place in the sanctuary where people would go and lie down on klini, a klini is a stone bench, from which we have the word clinical. So people would lie down on these klini, and the place would be called abaton. Abaton means inaccessible. So that actually by going into the dreaming, we access the inaccessible. And it's inaccessible for our habitual consciousness, but our embodied consciousness can access it.
Yeah. Yeah. And does this go, I've also heard in Egypt, ancient Egypt, they were using healing rooms, hypnosis, going into some of the theories. When I went to Egypt, it said that, that the king's chamber was for accessing consciousness. I'm more on the thought when I went there that it was actually for some sort of energy, because it seemed like a battery and you needed to put something in it. Like Saqqara is a computer chip. It's messed up. So does this go back to anything like that? Like,
yes, the methods that we are using come from what's called Asclepian healing. Asclepius was the god of medicine in Greek and Roman antiquity. And he was the serpent god. And that's why you always see a serpent around a staff and when you go to an apothecary, because that is the sign of Asclepius. And one of his followers is called Hippocrates, and you have from that the Hippocratic Oath. And they put dreaming as central to all healing processes. That through dreaming you could get in touch with deep space. You can very easily see this all as space travel. And all that you can look at the past and turn it around and see the past as the future. So we are looking for it to go as far away into space, as far away from habitual consciousness. In the same way that I don't know if you know that, but Carl Sagan was one of the great minds in science and popularizers, and he asked NASA as the first capsule was moving out of the solar system to turn the camera back at the solar system. And then there is a tiny speck of blue, and that tiny speck of blue, that's Earth. And so by being in that state of being so far away, Earth and everything looks really small, and you can begin to see things in its constellation. You can see things, how it all fits together. And so the further you get away, the more you can see, you can get an overview. And so what we're trying to do in this work through dreaming is to go as far away as possible so you can begin to feel different things than you felt before when it was all closed up in your habitual consciousness.
Right. Yeah. I can see the massive value in that. It's adding another perception, and it adds more awareness and more possibility.
Absolutely.
There's a word for it. You might be aware, but something about when you see when we first had the picture of the Earth.
Yeah.
When there's a psychological thing. Yeah. Yeah. There's something about, you know what I'm talking about? It's just like people saw that, it was like, it changed consciousness. It changed
consciousness. And then what Carl Sagan did, it changed consciousness again, because actually it showed not just Earth, but it showed the solar system. We got one photograph of the solar system, and we are a tiny little blue circle, tiny, tiny little. And on that little circle, everything happens. Everything we know happens there. And so we get an extra perspective. There was the Gaia perspective that happened when we made the first photograph from outer space. It was, I think, in the 80s or something. Earlier, because it was for the moonshot. So it was somewhere in the 60s. And that changed a lot, but then it changed again when we could see the solar system from outside. So what we're trying to do in our work is to get further and further away from habitual consciousness. That's why Jung and Hillman and myself, why we use alchemy so much, because we're trying to get out of the mindset of today into a completely different mindset. And as we get into a completely different mindset, we can see completely different things, because we have moved out of habitual consciousness of our day and age. That's why we love alchemy so much.
Yeah. Well, can you go into alchemy and like what that means for you and how you use it?
Yeah. So I started working with alchemy in 1971. So that's now 47 years ago. And because the main teacher of my background was a man called C.G. Jung. And Jung was initially a student of Sigmund Freud, and Freud was the developer of psychoanalysis, which is the field that I come from. It's a kind of a field of the mind and soul and body that is very Western. And so I am entirely within the Western tradition. So I'm not in the tradition of Zen. I'm not in the tradition of Buddhism. I'm in a Western tradition. And Jung discovered that the images that he got from his dreams and from his patients' dreams and from his active imagination, from the way that he could elicit the imagination, which is very much demonstrated in what he made called the Red Book. I did a course about the Red Book also at the Jung platform. it's a world of reality, and he is inside that world of reality, and he begins to see that the world that is around him, he's in it. It is surrounding him from all sides, and he begins to experience the intelligence of that world. And by experiencing the intelligence of that world, he is he becomes very isolated because it is just all happening, and he feels it is just happening to me. And then he gets to see alchemy, and he gets a manuscript sent to him in 1924 from China called The Secret of the Golden Flower by a man who translated the I Ching. The I Ching is a book of changes that you can have 20 sessions about. Wilhelm sent, who is translator of the I Ching, sent it to him, and he found in The Secret of the Golden Flower, he found that there were all kinds of images that came in his practice all the time, that came in his imaginations all the time, so that alchemy is actually a way of talking imagination, the way that imagination is speaking, the embodied imagination. So that's how the notion of embodied imagination begins, that alchemy is seeing all the materials as living beings. For an alchemist, there is no differentiation between physics and biology. For an alchemist, everything is biology. So everything's alive. All the metals are alive. They're living beings. They're like animals. And so the way that the alchemist is communicating with others, communicating with these metals. And these metals are actually living beings. And so it's a dialogue. And these imaginal beings from alchemy, these metals, begin to give very strange images. And these images are very similar to dream images. And so as we begin to explore the image world of alchemy and the embodied image world of alchemy, we begin to get a background for all these images that we are having contemporarily. And if you put this system that is from 500 years ago, if you begin to reflect our contemporary system in a system that's 500 years old, between them, new information begins to come up. We are completely identified with our 21st century materialism that is very hard to get out of, even if you say I'm not a materialist. Materialism we get taught that this is reality, this is reality, this is reality. Everything else is not reality. It's just imagination. But in alchemy, there was no difference between imagination and metals. It was all one entity. And so they would communicate with these living metal entities. And the process of it is a process of refinement. And so it's a very different perspective than if you say, I am this way because of my parents. In alchemy, it would be, this is happening to you. These are the metals that you're dealing with. And as you begin to deal with them, it doesn't matter where they came from. They're here now. And as they are here, your whole world can start refining when you start working on it. And that refinement is actually the way that consciousness is made, but not just consciousness in the mind, but consciousness in the body. You begin to get increasingly more embodied intelligence because you begin to feel it from the perspective of the materials. And then your body is one of the materials, and you can feel in your body how all these materials interact. And you begin to see that things are not right or wrong. Oh, I've done this because it's all so bad, because my parents did this and this. It's actually, you're in this state, you're in this condition. And as you work on that condition, the condition will begin to shift, it will begin to refine, it will gain consciousness, and it becomes much more manageable. And it not only becomes more manageable, but you begin to feel more valuable. And that is the end idea of alchemy, that it's about making gold, and making gold is about becoming more valuable. And that is one of the things that lots of people have an enormous problem with, that they don't feel valuable. They don't feel valued. They don't feel valuable. They don't feel that it has any meaning or anything, and they feel valueless, which is a great precursor to suicide. So you don't want to stay in that valueless state. And alchemy is about making value of life. And so that's why I think it is so interesting.
Wow, that's beautifully put. Hmm. You know, the Native American that I'm studying with, very fascinating individual for sure.
Yeah.
And he talked constantly about spiritual weight of silver. And just saying that, like, you know, that going into the alchemy world, it wasn't about acquiring silver so you were richer than everyone. It was, again, when you're speaking about value, it was the value that you brought to life. And that was a byproduct. And there was a spiritual weight to the actions, to the expression, to the way that you were living, also accessible to everybody else. And another thing on alchemy, you know, people, they focus so much on the metallurgy, but I heard, maybe you can touch on this, is like, it's more of a spiritual alchemy. It's like what you're creating within the self. It's like an alchemical process of consciousness also, or no?
Well, you are making several preconceptions in your questions, namely that there is a difference between self and metal, and that there is an alchemist and metal. Actually, what's happening is that there is a field, and in that the whole field is going through a transformation process, and the alchemist is part of the field and the metal is part of the field. And so it's not either happening in the metal or in the alchemist, it's happening in the alchemist metal field. And so it is a transformation of the medium itself. And that's what I would go from, that as we do this kind of alchemical work, the medium that we're in, which is the way that we are in the world, the medium that we're in begins to refine all by itself. Silver is a very interesting thing, because I gave lots of lectures about silver, because silver is the color of the mirror. It's the color of the full moon. And some people say that imagination, and the true imagination, is the world of the mirror without the mirror. And so it is that world of images that actually has a different kind of gravity. It's being part of the moon, and being more lunatic, being part of this reflective world in which there are images, and interacting with this world of real images. So silver is very interesting, and I totally agree with your interlocutor that it's not about becoming rich from silver, because they always talk about our silver and our gold. And that is not silver and gold, but that is the tincture that can make silver and the tincture that can make gold. So it is not about the outcome. It is about having a creative imagination that is so potent and so concentrated that it can actually change things in the world.
Wow, that was epic. You just psychotherapisted me so hard with that upgrade. So good. I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Holy crap. That's amazing. Well, so much is coming up in my mind now. Like, the first thing when we go back, it's like, I remember seeing on YouTube when you zoom all the way in, and it's like, this is the smallest thing that we're aware of, right? And then you zoom all the way out to the known universe. You can see that visually, and then they all of a sudden start to look the same, but it gives you a perspective. But it seems in like your work, you're trying to do that experientially. Yes. Which I think is incredible. Yeah. Then on the alchemy thing, and I'm just going to rant this out so you can choose whatever inspires you most, is I'm thinking about the alchemical image of that. It's like got the dome and the guy is looking outside the dome. That one, I forget that image. So I'm wondering if you know anything about that, because my friend Robert Grant went to Egypt. He's a mathematician. He's made all these mathematical discoveries. He made a friggin' scientific discovery in Egypt in April. And he was showing me all of these alchemical images of like the one of them is the two towers. It's Bose and another one, and you go up these stairs, and like he's writing me and blowing my mind. It's like, Robert, like I don't know what you're talking about. Oh my God, I'm doing all this research, but it was really incredible. And then I've heard Jung was actually more of an alchemist, and is later. I don't know if it's Jung or someone else, but someone was way more of an alchemist than people knew. And the later years of his life was just working on alchemy, but he's well known for something. I don't know if that's Jung or someone else. You know?
Jung was certainly working in the last part of his life almost exclusively on alchemy. He studied it, and he became a really good student of alchemy. His work became increasingly influenced by alchemy. I think that the way that that alchemy is influencing the world of psychology is very important. But I begin to miss out on you. You lined up a series of questions. Can you do them again?
Yeah, sure. I was talking about the alchemy and that image of the person.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Let's do them one by one. I don't know who first made that, but it's a very well-known one. It is that you see the firmament, and the firmament is the way that the sky was seen as, and the stars were seen as firm and as like a kind of a stone, so that we're living inside a giant stone with holes in it for the stars. And that as we move through all the different spheres of the firmament, finally we break through out of the firmament into a kind of a light situation. And I think that then that is the moment where the light that comes from outside begins to enter into the system. And I think that that could be seen as the moment that the world suddenly becomes animated. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. That's exactly it. And so outside of breaking through the stars, you get into that animated world, and you get into that world where you can actually see all the different movements that are going on that are archetypal. You can see all the different wheels of time that are going on. You can see the storms that are happening. You can see the suns. And as you do that, you become part of that alive universe. You break through the firmament, you break through habitual consciousness, through what is firm and what is clear, and you get to the other side. And as you get to the other side, you get into a world that is purely creative, that is purely in a state of animation. And therefore, the alchemist that is crawling through habitual consciousness out into this other world is in a state of great surprise. And because that is a moment of enormous surprise, because now we're in another world. That's what I was talking about, that I want to get into deep space. That's why I want to get out of the mind. This is the alchemist. He is going out of his mind. The mind is the town and the tree and the city and our star called the sun. And he is moving out of that firm system into, and the moon, he's moving out of that firm system into the purely creative system that is outside of habitual consciousness. And that is very surprising. And that's what I'm trying to help people within this course, to go out of your mind. This is a photograph, this is a woodcut of going out of your mind. The alchemist is going out of his mind.
That's an amazing explanation. I'm so glad that I thought about this image. So when an alchemist, or maybe yourself, thinks about the firmament, are you thinking more of a mental firmament of moving from like what your perception of physical reality is? Because some people take this literally and think that we're in a dome. Are you suggesting that in this thought, it's more of a mental firmament of going past materialism and physicality into something greater?
Well, the notion of the firmament means dome. It means that it's a stone dome and with little holes in it. So I definitely don't think that literally we are living in a world like that. I am much too influenced by science to ever think that that would be the possible way that we are. But what I do know is that the structure of the imagination is set up in this way. And remember that I see imagination as a form of reality, right? That the reality of the imagination is set up this way, that we are living surrounded by a firmament of what we know. We are living surrounded by a firmament in which I know that I'm a man, that I speak English, that I am working my computer, that I live in the United States of America, that I'm a certain age, all that kind of things. That is part of my firmament. And that will all limit me if I want to get to that place beyond the firmament where the world is in a state of constant creation and constant creativity, because the firmament will hold me back, and that's the shape of my head. And so I get caught in my skull and I cannot go out of my skull. So what I'm trying to help people is to go out of your skull, break out of the skull and get into what is around. And there's much more around than what is just happening in our skulls, because we are learning through materialism that everything is happening inside of us, right? Everything, all your mentation, all your soul, all your feelings is all happening inside of you. That is not phenomenology. Phenomenology, which is what I'm doing, is the science of experience, tells me that soul is all around me. Soul is not inside of me. And that's what the great contribution of C.G. Jung was, that he said, soul is not in us, we are in soul. So soul surrounds us from all sides, and like in a dream. And so therefore we can get in touch with that soul, and thereby soul is also called anima. So thereby we become animated. So by getting out of ourselves, by breaking out of our skull, by breaking out of our firmament, we can get into a place that is actually alive and animated. That's what this alchemist does in that woodcut that you show.
That's an amazing explanation. I kind of want to go through a few ways. Like, number one is like how. The second thing would be, which I know is deep and vague. Two, there's another alchemical image. Maybe you can touch on that, and if there's any reference to from your information, because the first description is so well. And I think that when you get out of the dome, you know, like the head, we walk around thinking that we're just material and everything is so serious and we need to hold on to everything material and we're existing and we need to protect ourselves. And it's very individualized, you know, it's very, and it's very small. It's whatever the heck that is going on in here.
But isn't your generation breaking out of that?
I hope so.
I get the impression much more so than other generations before you. We were also in the early 60s, but in the mid 60s, but the sense that we are encapsulated in this physical realm is we are entombed. We are entombed in this physical world because there's nothing beyond the physical world.
Yeah.
In this mindset.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting because, I read something a long time ago, something about like civilizations and how there was a technology in each one, and it talked about part of this article was the telescoping of information and intelligence of what we're experiencing now. It's like you look at, you know, 1000 AD to 2000 to 3000 or whatever, you know, the technological explosion is accelerating so fast. You know, it's just kind of exponentially growing, and so we're having all of these new solutions and these new problems we couldn't even think about. So like kids being so attached to their TV or their iPod, they're actually getting more disconnected, and they're not even connecting with nature, which is something that we did before. So we have access to all this information.
Hold on. You're giving an incredible bump talk on screens. I think that that people who are in, like now, right? Everybody that is seeing us, everybody's participating in this is in cyberspace. And we give an incredible bum rap to this being in cyberspace, but that is a form of being. It is similar to dreaming. Cyberspace is similar to dreaming, and it is a real world. And we will learn differently. There may not be physical trees in cyberspace, but there are other things in cyberspace that are beginning to develop. And with this whole virtual reality that's coming in, there is this negativity that people have about cyberspace, whereas, for instance, research has shown that kids who do a lot of video games have more lucid dreams. So you don't know. We are natural, sentimental literalists. We think that nature is good, and I live in nature. I live on a mountaintop in Santa Barbara. I live phenomenal. I overlook the ocean. Fabulous. But I spent a lot of my life in cyberspace. We started the first Cyber Dreamwork was in 1997, was the first interactive space where you could work your dreams, and it's still there 21 years later. I spend a lot of time in cyberspace, and I want to see that. I don't want to say that time is less well spent than my time sitting outside looking at the ocean. We have to be really careful. Everybody's talking after each other. We're going in lockstep in the sense of, we're all in screens and we're doing all these things on screens and we don't have any sense of nature. It doesn't do anything for me. I think it's sentimental shit.
Well, I think that's an important point, because it's both. We can access a podcast like this, or someone can do your course in cyberspace, or we could just use it in a different way. The reason why I shared that was because I've spoken in a couple of schools and talked to a bunch of the kids, and suicide's a big problem and disconnection is a big problem, and it can be used for good or bad. It's just what that tool is happening right now among the young kids. They're feeling more disconnected because not only when you were in high school, when we were there, was they could make fun of you and you'd have a problem. Now they put it on social media, and now it's for everybody to see it again in cyberspace. So they're dealing with different things. So I think we have massive opportunity, but also things that the younger generation are struggling with. That
absolutely. But don't you think that it was the same in a village, that everybody knew everything about you? And you didn't need social media. It was just a look that you get when you go to the grocery store, and a scarlet letter that you get put on you. I think that we're living in a village again, and that people are doing things in the village, and that everybody's looking over each other's shoulder, which is village consciousness. And so, yes, I think that the rise in suicides is absolutely horrifying, and it scares me. I mean, I have grandchildren, so I feel that that's a dangerous thing. That's why what I'm saying is, if we get more into that embodied intelligence and feel more that our body is a mystery and a miracle. Did you know, I just heard that yesterday from one of my physician friends, that the kidney is more intelligent than the neocortex, because the kidney is figuring out how much of which minerals to take in, which minerals to let go, how much water there should be in the system, how much water should be taken out of the system, all those kind of things. It is incredibly complex. It is incredibly intelligent system. The body is incredibly intelligent. And as we begin to feel that and begin to access that, the world becomes more meaningful because you're less helpless. I think many of these suicides is about being totally helpless in a world that means nothing. And so, and if you have that in the village, where everybody looks at you and said, hey, 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 what they do in villages, then, but there's also this thing of being cared for, having your friends, and having that in cyberspace. It has so many different sides. I don't want to take one side.
No, I definitely agree with that. we live in interesting times, that's for sure. And I really love the idea of empowering people,
Yeah,
to
that's the idea.
recreate. And that's the sad thing. Whatever's happening out in the world, it seems to be disempowering. And media, I'm gonna throw a blanket on it, but like a lot of the time people would say, oh, Facebook's all nonsense. This is all nonsense. It's because of what they're watching. Mainstream media is perpetuating. So you can control that cyberspace experience. You can go look at something terrible, just throw up Fox News and just go through that rabbit hole, and that's all your Facebook. And
or you can listen to Matt Belair.
Yeah, exactly. So, or Robert, and, go do your course. And this is the choice that you get, but it's not, you have to go find it. Right. And then that in Buddhism, they call mental nutriments. It's coming in and you're experiencing it directly. And now that's your reality.
Yeah.
So we need to be mindful of that. And I appreciate your work and what you're doing and creating something that we can go out there and then experience something, and I think that your work is super important. I could talk a lot about the body because of martial arts background and all that and the importance of it. So I definitely hear what you're saying. We only have 5 minutes left because I know you got something to do.
Yeah,
so I want to ask you if there's anything that you wish that we had talked about. You can talk about whatever you want, elaborate on anything. If you want to go longer, I'm here because this is amazing, but just wanted to share my appreciation for what you've shared today.
Yeah. Well, let people know about the course. I think that that's really important. I think that one of the things that happens when you go into this embodied knowledge is that somehow the world becomes more lovable. Not that it becomes more lovely, because it, as I say always, it has always been a shitstorm. But that you can love it more because it comes alive and it becomes an other. It's not just a dead stone that you live on, but the world begins to communicate with you, and you begin to feel that you're connected. And as you feel that you're connected to the world, that is a moment where life becomes more vibrant and where everything quickens and where you can feel with your heart and where you get a heart connection to the world. That's what I'm trying to help people do by getting with the embodied intelligence, getting a heart connection to the world. Because I think that one of the great dangers at the moment is that people are disconnected with their hearts, and that we have to help connect with the thought of the heart. The thought of the heart was always seen to be the language of imagination. Language of imagination was called the thought of the heart in the 15th, 14th century. And so that we connect back to that heart and connect back with the heart to the world and get more heart in the world and put our hearts in the world. And as we put our hearts in the world starts giving back.
I completely agree with all that. And I think that's really beautiful and really wonderful. And I'm down. I'm definitely going to check it out. I'm super curious. And it's super important work. It is. And it makes me sad to look in when I'm going around and talking to people, how disempowered they feel, how valueless they feel, how helpless they feel.
Hey, young man. Hi there.
You want to say hello? This is Arlo.
Hi, Arlo. Good to see you.
This is his first,
on air?
On air on the podcast. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's super important because, it breaks my heart to see any adult. And you've probably seen this in the world where you see people that are so beautiful and amazing, because we all are. And
like him, like Arlo. It's for Arlo.
Yeah, exactly.
As we become more aware, of the world as alive, we can teach our children and our grandchildren how to be back in the world as a living being.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's beautiful. Robert, thank you so much for your time. You're always welcome back on if you wish.
Okay.
Where can people find the course if they want to check it out?
So www.Jung platform, that is JUNG PLATFORM, jungplatform.com.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks so much for today. Have an amazing day, and I appreciate you.
You too. And I very much enjoyed talking with you. This was great, and I'm sure going to come on again at some point.
Sounds great. See you, Robert. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.